It's Wednesday, November 11th, 2020, Veterans Day, with you for another socially distant edition of KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors is coming to you from various corners of the Missouri School of Journalism. I'm down in the Futures Lab studio in the lower level of the Reynolds Journalism Institute, and my colleagues, Ernest Perry and Kiely, are in their own corners of our school. Hi to you, Kathy.
Good afternoon.
And to Ernest.
Good afternoon.
Well, on our program this week,
we did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
Late Saturday morning, major news organizations called Pennsylvania, some a little faster than others. I'll ask Ernest and Kathy about who called what and when. We'll talk about the unlikely stars of the past week, the number crunchers and the guys at the big board, and a fixture on our televisions since 1984. A nation says goodbye to Alex Trebek. But we're going to start with the moment. Just before noon on Saturday, while Rudy Giuliani and crew were standing outside the Four Seasons landscaping company, the president was on the golf course, and the networks, the Associated Press and the major national newspapers, they called the election for President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Ernest, I've got to ask, since we talked last week about how you took a little bit of a news nap, were you watching Saturday when this happened?
I was. I had the TV on, and I was sort of walking around, and then I had reached for my phone, and my daughter texted and said, "It's over. He's Biden's won." So I immediately, turned toward the TV and hit the unmute button, and just as I did that, the network I was watching, which was NBC, had called it, and I flipped over to CBS because I kind of thought that they did a really good job of just sticking to the facts, and so I kind of followed CBS for most of the coverage for about the next hour or so.
Okay, so Kathy, you were a little bit more in line with me between Tuesday and Saturday, watching a whole lot more. I personally was afraid to turn my TV off, afraid I'd miss something. Where were you? How did you find out?
I was getting my nails done.
Ooh, nice color.
And I did not. I saw the AP alert come across my phone and had very little reaction, actually, because call me Cassandra, but I kind of anticipated what was to come, that this, unlike Ernest's daughter, I did not think it was over, and it isn't really, kind of, sort of. I mean, I think it is, but our long national nightmare is not. I mean, I think I went through the post-election election in 2000, so I was prepared for a longer denouement.
Okay, so what were some of the thoughts you had as you watched that coverage unfold during the week? How did it maybe compare to that post-election election that happened then to now?
Well, I think the media was prepared, mm-hmm. And I think that was a good thing. I don't think anybody was getting over their skis, and I also think, though, that once the election was called, the media also sort of had a united front. I mean, when I saw that Fox News had a chyron that said Biden elected, I thought, okay, it is a done deal, I think, in the eyes of all but a few Republicans. And so it was interesting to me to see the unanimity there. I think this is a very different situation from the one in 2000. There's more precedent for it, number one, but it's also a very different election and a different aftermath of the election. So I think you're seeing a lot more unanimity, with the exception of a few very prominent Republicans. You're seeing a lot more unanimity about the outcome.
So we're going to talk more about Fox News in a few minutes. But Ernest, I want to back up to something you said, that you had started with NBC, you'd gone back to CBS, somebody that a network that you had been very much in, that you had been a little bit more reliant on because you liked their coverage better. Talk about what it was that set them apart, mainly because that was the one network I didn't watch through all of this.
Well, I think what set them apart for me was that they were pretty much, it was all, they stuck with the facts. They didn't get all caught up on the big board and trying to determine where exactly this vote was going to come from and that vote was going to come from. Not that they didn't have all that; they did have all of that, but they really stuck to the story. Their analysis of it was pretty much straight down the line. I thought even I would say the even Gayle King, who at times can be very emotional and really give her own perspective. Even she was pretty. These are the facts. This is what we're hearing. This is what we're seeing. This is what people are telling us. And bring everyone on the set was bringing their particular knowledge into the conversation, and it all sort of flowed pretty well together. And the more they did it, the more I sort of stuck with them. And then from now, every now and then I would flip over to one or the other networks to see what they were doing. They were doing their usual, bring in some, former politician who is now an advisor, and then they start talking. It's like, I just got really tired of that after about a day.
Well, and Saturday became what felt like a really long day from that noontime into the 7 o'clock speech, which was, it was interesting to watch, but I really want to take a second to talk about what was almost magic on Saturday Night Live, how they were able to turn around that show in less than 2 hours. There is a fantastic article that is out from Slate that gets into the details of how they were able to find a near identical suit for Maya Rudolph's Kamala Harris character. It turns out they had 4 different tailors working on that suit in the 85 minutes they had to turn it.
No, that was amazing. It was. I was struck by that too. I thought, wow, they nailed it. They got her exact suit, even down to the. I thought it was really an interesting wardrobe choice. She had that little '70s style bow, and which I haven't seen for a long time. But it was obviously a tribute. You could guess that she would come out in a white suit. That has become the tribute to the suffrage movement. Every time a woman breaks a glass ceiling or puts a crack in it, but who knew? It was the backstory is who's the wardrobe person at NBC, and they should definitely get some kind of an award.
Well, this election, Ernest had mentioned it too, brought out some very emotional responses in the streets and for commentators and on the air. Here is Democratic strategist Donna Brazile on Fox News.
It's been a long time coming to be the last to get voting rights, to be those who just waited and waited for our turn. It's been a long time coming. I thought about my mom and my grandmother this morning. They didn't have the right to vote, but I did. I spent all my life believing that the right to vote was the key to our future. And because of the American people, the faith, those who did not see color or gender, those who believed that it was about confidence and just giving everyone a seat at the table. This is not about asking anyone to leave the room. Just scoot over and let women also share in the leadership of this country. I'm so grateful that this moment has come.
Over on CNN, Van Jones had an equally, in fact, on some levels, even more emotional response for Black and Brown and Indigenous people, for women, for people who identify as LGBTQ+, who identify as Muslim or Jewish or really anything other than a Protestant Christian faith. Ernest, this was like the letting out of a breath that so many have been holding for 4 years.
Yeah, it was pretty emotional. Donna Brazile, the comments she made reminded me of the way in which many people felt, in particular Black Americans, when Barack Obama was elected back in 2008, and those were some of the similar emotions during that time. Whereas Van Jones's emotions, I think, were the sort of pin-up emotions of frustration and in many ways letting go of some of the anger, anxiety that many people have felt over the last 4 years under President Trump, and he sort of spoke for all of those voices. So it was, there were two sort of different emotional messages there for me in Donna Brazile and Van Jones.
And for anybody who hasn't had a chance yet to watch or to listen to Van Jones's response, it is on our links blog at kbia.org. Kathy, talk for a second, too, about that message that she is sharing in that moment to the Fox News audience about giving women a seat at the table.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. This, Donna Brazile's response was on Fox News. So let's keep in mind who the audience is. And so I thought that was really great, actually, that it's great that we're seeing people able to communicate across those political divides, and an audience like the kind of folks who watch Fox seeing how this affected an individual who, maybe they don't agree with politically, but that there's this very personal, emotional moment that I think anybody can identify with on a human level, forget about the politics. So I think there's that. I think the idea that, as Donna said, waiting so long for our turn, this is a really big breakthrough, not just for people of color, but for women. And as we've said before, or I think we've talked about before, given his age, Joe Biden is almost certainly a one-term president, and that means his vice president is going to be a leading candidate in 4 years. And so, in a sense, by putting Kamala Harris where he did, Joe Biden has helped to tee up a potentially very, very historic moment in our nation's history.
Well, and even more so, one of the things that I'm a little ashamed I didn't take notice of myself that my mom pointed out to me is that the first two people in line to the presidency are both women.
Yes, exactly.
And that's huge.
It's kind of funny. The Republicans who are really trying to slow walk the election results, if they slow walk them too much, they're liable to get temporary President Pelosi. And so that may give some of the more conservative folks a second thought. But she is the next in line if we don't have a clear president by January 20th.
That's right.
So we can talk about all of the differences between how different organizations covered things this weekend, but we would be remiss if we didn't spend some time looking at just those owned by Rupert Murdoch. Something that was really telling to me was that the Wall Street Journal sent its mobile push alert a good 10 to 15 minutes before Fox News called it. I will tell you that I was that person with the remote control going back and forth between all of the networks, including Fox. I even discovered this weekend I have Newsmax on my Mediacom cable package, so I was going way up into the high numbers, and Fox was pretty much the last one to call it. And for me, even seeing that the Journal called it 15 minutes earlier was an interesting thing. Ernest, talk about that for a second. Why wait as long between those? Yeah,
I found it interesting, seeing as though they were one of the first to call Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were the first. Most others still haven't called or had waited past Saturday.
Yeah, you still have. You pull up the New York Times or the Washington Post website, and they still haven't called Arizona. Mm-hmm. But so they called Arizona quickly, but not necessarily Pennsylvania, which is what sends Biden over the top, which I found to be strange. However, I mean, it took them a while to do that, but I think Kathy brought up a very good point early on in our conversation about the fact that all of the networks, all of the media organizations have pretty much stayed on the fact that Joe Biden is the president-elect. And along with that, they are talking about and they're all reporting on the president's lack of concession, and that he won't concede and that he's being supported. But right after they say that, they talk about his baseless claims. Every one of them that I've seen has used that word, his baseless claims or his baseless accusations as it relates to the election. And they're all pretty much sticking to that script. Even Fox, even the Wall Street Journal, even a lot of the conservative mainstream news organizations, they're all doing that. And that, I think, is not indicative of what we've seen over the course of the last 4 years. I really am surprised by the way in which they've all sort of followed that line.
Kathy, thoughts that you might have on that?
Yeah, I was surprised actually that Fox was as emphatic as they were, and certainly the night I was watching the coverage during Biden's speech, and there was no doubt about it. And I think since then, you hear all of the networks referring to him as the president-elect, and I think that tells you something. It's maybe a gutty call on Fox's part, because I think there are probably a lot of people in their audience who aren't happy to hear that. But I think that's what news organizations are supposed to do. We're not supposed to give you the happy news, the news you want to hear. We need to give you the news that is. And so good for them for doing that. I think the reason that you're seeing that disconnect between some of the politicians whom Fox covers and likes to highlight, and the news organization, is that the politicians are worried a lot more about how the voters are going to feel, and they are, to some extent, I would say, pandering to some of those voters. Republicans are worried about getting primaried. They're worried about people on the very pro-Trump elements, seeing them as traitors. But the Fox News organization is doing it. It shows me that they see themselves as a serious news organization. They want to be regarded as a serious news organization. They understand that there is life after Donald Trump, and they have a reputation that they need to uphold and preserve if they want to be taken seriously as a news organization.
So there were some unlikely stars who emerged on television news this week. The guys at the big board, John King on CNN, and the guy in the khakis, NBC's Steve Kornacki.
Steve Kornacki, I know I'm saying it wrong, but I like this guy. This is how I like my reporters to look. Disheveled and concerned. I love this dude.
We all love this dude. During our coverage early Friday morning, I suggested we get Steve a chair. He told us, quote, "If I sit down, I'll fall asleep." There was no chair. Steve carried us through this week. He truly is one of the best guys you will ever meet. Khaki sales, understandably, are through the roof.
So that first voice you heard there was Leslie Jones, formerly of Saturday Night Live. The second, of course, Willie Geist on NBC. I had friends texting me all week. The Kornacki cam was giving them life. His energy, his analysis, his quick math. Kathy, he kept people engaged and tuned in, hooking them almost like election coverage became a drug waiting for the next update. They're fun. They're in their element. People developing crushes on them.
Yeah, the nerds of the newsroom too. I mean, every newsroom has somebody like that, and I think part of the appeal, though, of Kornacki is that he just looks like a news guy. He is, as we just heard, scruffy, disheveled. He's not polished, and I think people really gravitated towards that because so much of the network television coverage is going to be very polished, and the suits and the blow-dried hair, and Kornacki's so different that he really stood out. And I think also, as you pointed out, his sheer enthusiasm for what the information he was delivering was just infectious. It was great.
Well, and for anybody who hasn't seen the clip from Fallon from the other night, you sent it to me last night, Tuesday night, maybe at about 10 o'clock, and I watched it and I almost fell over. Fallon goes to visit him in his office, and it's Kathy, you describe it.
Well, it's a pig pen. I mean, it's
yes, it is.
It's a sty, I would say, not really an office, a sty. And again, he's a reporter who he's too busy doing what he loves to stop and clean up. And my favorite little detail is, as Fallon's kind of poking his head in the door, is you can clearly see that there's some sort of a coat rack, and there are several bath towels hanging from that coat rack. So just think about that. Bath towels in the office.
Well, and that's,
I think, especially in these COVID years, I don't think Osho would approve. But
so that's a character, right? And at the same time, Ernest, you said this a little bit before. You had said this last week, that some of the more subdued approaches and the contextual reporting that led to better coverage this time. Does this character type of addition? Like you said, it turned you off from watching NBC where Chuck Todd was at the big board or John King on CNN. Does it take away from that contextual and more subdued approach that you found to be more helpful?
Well, I don't know if it takes away from it, but I think after a while you sort of, at least me, I'm just being personal. I do like, out of all of them, Steve Kornacki is the one that I like, and the reason for that is because he seems more personable about it. But I do think that once he got that stardom at the beginning of all of this, it was sort of like, okay, this is good. But then somehow I think as his numbers rose, they kept putting him on. It's like it was sort of like let's keep feeding the beast, let's keep giving him the drug. And at one point I started feeling sorry for the guy. I mean,
because you wanted him to have a chair and take a nap.
I get up in the morning and I get on the treadmill at 6 a.m. He's still there, and I'm like, let the guy sleep.
He easily had to have been on the air 20 to 21 hours a day.
Right.
Sometimes not even saying anything, but still with this high level of energy. He wasn't kidding when he said if he sat down, he'd fall asleep.
Yeah, I mean, I was waiting for him to fall over. I was like, when are they going to let him have a break or something, you know? Does he even get to go to the bathroom?
I was going to say, you got to give the guy a bio break at some point, too.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, well, it was only 2 weeks ago we were here talking about the new nonprofit news outlet covering state government down in Jefferson City, the Missouri Independent. My opinion, it's doing a pretty good job. It's filling the gaps our local outlets have left in the past few years as staffs have shrunken and resources have been redeployed elsewhere. Friday, one of the staffers there, Rudy Keller, was about to ask a question of Governor Parson when this happened.
We'll take another question. First of all, Rudy, I'm not going to answer your question, whatever you're going to ask, but I'm going to tell you this. I am not going to respond to a C4 out of Virginia that is absolutely a propaganda news agency that come to the state of Missouri. I have been transparent as governor of the state of Missouri from day one to say who funds me and my campaigns and everything else. This political agenda, whether it's George Soros or people like him, of what you're going to be doing, is not fair to Missouri outlets that where they hear every day, day in and day out, and trying to report the news to the people of this state. I'm just not going to recognize a nonprofit out of Virginia that is here but nothing but a political propaganda.
So, Kathy, you wrote a column about this that was published over the weekend in the Columbia Daily Tribune, which is a paper that has published several stories from the Independent to date. And in it, you said that everything about this moment felt like it was a setup.
Yeah, it felt like an ambush. The governor's press secretary or one of his aides had already called for the final question, and so it looked like, and it felt like this was a speech that had been rehearsed and planned, and so that kind of bothered me. The other thing that bothered me was that this happened. It coincided with the appearance, very brief appearance. It was around for I don't know how long, but it disappeared shortly after. Of a website that can only be described as a trolling site.
Oh, I still saw it yesterday.
Oh, okay. It was back on, but it was still live. I will say that. The link was live, but for a brief while, it was the very first thing that would surface if you searched for the Missouri Independent. So it was high on the Google search, and it felt like there was a concerted effort to really cut the knees off, or cut this organization off at the knees before they could even get started. And my point in my column was, we've all worked for publishers who have, shall we say, unusual connections. Certainly prior to the digital revolution, you could not be a publisher without being a very wealthy person. You had to own a building and fleet of trucks and printing presses. And all of those folks who I worked for early in my career had interests before the government. But with one exception, none of them ever tried to interfere in the news product. And that is because if you're a smart business person, you realize that your reputation relies on your objectivity and the sense that the news product isn't being interfered with. And so I think it's just better to give this organization a chance we have lost so many people in state houses, so many reporters in state houses. This organization has hired some top reporters who are crackerjack reporters. They're veterans. And to be able to put that kind of reporting power on the state house is only going to benefit the people of Missouri. I just think it's way too early for the governor to be jumping to conclusions about what kind of journalism this outfit is going to produce based on its financial connections. And I do think they should do a better job at making those connections clear. But they do disclose. They just don't disclose as well or as fully as they should. But it's clear who's behind this organization, and I just think they deserve a chance.
I don't want to cut you off, but we're down to just a couple of minutes, and before we go, I want to make sure we have an opportunity to honor a mainstay on American televisions since the mid-'80s, someone that we lost last week.
And now, here is the host of Jeopardy, Alex Trebek.
Ernest, I'm putting it in the form of a question. What is the impact of a single game show host on American pop culture history?
The answer is tremendous.
Talk a little bit about that.
I will say, I learned a lot. If you really want to learn, from watching television, Alex Trebek and Jeopardy was the show. There are a lot of people who came to this country who learned about a lot of things having to do with this country from watching Jeopardy. And, it's just one of those shows that you sort of grew up with. And you grew up with him, and you'd hear the music, you'd hear his voice, and you knew what was coming.
Well, and one of the things I find interesting is that he has been the host of that show since 1984. And you have Alex Trebek, you have Pat Sajak. I have to ask, is there ever going to be another game show host again that has that kind of lasting power and impact? We're seeing a resurgence of game shows, but that one ubiquitous host that takes us through for that long and is associated with a show in that way?
I don't know if the media landscape will allow that to happen. They were figures who became mainstays in our culture and mainstays in our lives, and we just don't give people and shows enough time to be able to do that anymore. So, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
They came out of an era of appointment TV, so everybody would gather around and watch at the same time. And I just think it's a very different climate now. So that, there's not that ability, I think, for a single person to develop that kind of audience or that kind of following.
Okay, well, we are just about out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about each of the topics we talked about today and watch a bunch of videos we weren't able to work into today's show. Those are all on the Links blog. You can find that under both the programs and podcasts tab at kbia.org. We're also available wherever you get your podcast downloads, including iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave comments, questions, or see previews of what we'll be talking about next time. Our thanks to Travis McMillan for directing today's show and Aaron Hay for handling the audio. Tim Pilcher composed our original theme music. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us next week for more Views of the News.